it going? Stoudman coming right back at you, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the things that I picked up in the Criterion sale, the Barnes & Noble Criterion sale, which happens twice a year, twice. However many times I decide to do it, it's definitely not something that happens every day or every month. So when it does happen, you got to take advantage of it. See how much money you have, whether or not you got any free money to spend, and if you do have some free money to spend it on that, because you're not going to get some cheapo Criterion titles every day, man. You got to make it worth it. You got to do it. So this time around I had enough money that I got five titles. And I usually don't get that many titles, and I usually don't want to spend that much money. But this time around I said, screw it. I want Criterion stuff. So, yeah, especially considering that there were some movies that I've been wanting to see for quite some time, and I didn't want to wait anymore. I wanted to see them, and I figured the best way to see them, obviously, is to see them through the Criterion version. The Criterion version is usually the best version of movies. Not always, not exclusively, but usually the best version. And even when it's not the best version, it's usually one of the best versions to watch. So, yeah, I went ahead and decided to pick up 5 different titles this time. Most of them on the recommendation of friends. Others because I just happen to know, based on what I've heard about them and studied and learned about them in the past, that they are classics and they are important to film history. And, you know, I'll talk about other details about them as I get to them. But let's get into it already. So, the first thing I got here, I'm going to go from newer to older movies. So, the first pickup I made was Videodrome, David Cronenberg's Videodrome, which I had never seen before. And after getting it from the Barnes & Noble Criterion sale, I have actually seen this now. I literally just got done watching it before making this video. And yeah, creepy, good stuff. Also very predictive science fiction. Most, if not all, science fiction is predictive. But I feel like that Cronenberg did a really good job of actually predicting what would happen in this movie. Of course, he predicted it based on the technology that they had then, and based on what they were experiencing at that time with technology. So everything was video cassettes, and everything was about television and, you know, the TV screen and whatnot. But a lot of things he predicted would happen with the TV screen actually kind of ended up happening with the computer screen and the internet and all that stuff. I feel like kind of the stuff that he was talking about with this movie is something that we then eventually actually saw in real life with the internet. I know that seems weird because this David Cronenberg usually goes a bit above and beyond with his predictions in such a way that they would never come true fully, right? But a lot of the best science fiction does that, and this is one of those, I feel like in some ways, classics. I hate to say that because it's definitely a weird one, and it's definitely not in any way, shape, or form a normal science fiction, except for, I guess, in that one way where it's accurately predictive of a few things on a very simplistic level. So I'll give you some examples. One of the things the main character says near the beginning of the movie, in fact, is that it won't be too long before we all have special names. And he was talking about special names for, like, our personalities on television. Well, what Cronenberg might not have realized in 1983 was that about 10 years later, not even that, we'd all be getting AOL and stuff like that, and getting online and getting screen names. What are screen names if they are not special names? What is Stoudman if not a special name that has been attached to me based on what people see of me and through this fantastic technology called the internet, right? So that's, I feel like, something that, even though he was talking about it in terms of a, television screen, if we think about it in terms of what's happened with monitors and the internet, and screen names, it's very much a similar thing. Not the exact same thing, but a very similar thing to what actually happened. So he's pretty damn right about that. And one of the other things they're talking about is just this very basic concept that people have become, in this post-apocalyptic, one might say, world. In this world, people have become far too attached to their television screens, so to the point where they have like this place. You know how they like have missions for the homeless, right? And where they can go and get food and whatnot, or even have a place to stay. They had missions for people here who didn't have access to television, because television became such an important thing that they actually really needed in order to survive and stuff like that. Or that was the general idea, right? Like that for some reason these people felt like they needed this to survive, right? They got attached to this entertainment, to this, I guess in this movie it's referred to as like a perversion and stuff like that. But they got so attached to it like that. And I mean, I feel like you could say the same thing about the internet. People have become very attached to the internet as well. We don't have missions where people who don't have access to the internet are given access. It's not as outrageous as that. But we do have libraries where people who don't have access to the internet can go and use the internet if they need to for things. And it is true that like a lot of the things in our society nowadays you kind of do need the internet for. Most homeless people actually use like smartphones and stuff like that. They'll go and buy a really cheap smartphone so that they can access the internet through Wi-Fi from various businesses like, say, Burger King, or I think even Starbucks offers free Wi-Fi. So anywhere you can get free Wi-Fi, they'll go and get that Wi-Fi and they'll connect to the internet on their smartphones, and they'll use their smartphone to look at things like YouTube or whatever. Not only because when you're homeless, you're very bored because you have nothing to do. Like, that's exactly how they describe it. Not only because of that, but because if you're a homeless person, what kind of job are you going to be able to apply for? Most homeless people are homeless because they don't have many skills. If you don't have many skills, you're going to have to apply for a job that's on like the lower rung of the economic ladder. And most of those jobs on the lower rung of the economic ladder nowadays, your McDonald's, your Burger King I mentioned there, but even like grocery stores and Target and Walmart and stuff like that. If you go into those stores and you ask for an application to apply, they will flat out tell you, most of them will flat out tell you, we don't do that anymore. You have to go online and apply there. So there it is. You actually desperately need the internet for certain things in order to survive, in order to get anywhere in life, in order to do anything with your life. So that aspect of the film, I feel like, in terms of like this desperate desire and need to use the television, can be seen today in how we interact with the internet, right? I mean, how many people are so like attracted to their smartphones, and why are they attracted to their smartphones if not for access to the internet? Obviously, it's, I think, a different kind of interaction than what you would see with television, so it's not exactly as David Cronenberg envisioned it in Videodrome, but a lot of the same concepts, a lot of the basic ideas behind it are in this film. So yeah, I did enjoy that aspect of it, and I'm glad I got the Criterion edition of it. So yeah, that's the first one. I don't want to get too out of control with that. I know. Well, I'm long-winded again. So The next one, not to get too much on a post-apocalyptic or disturbing vision of the future kick, I also got Brazil. Both of these movies, by the way, were recommended to me by Zaran Isaac. And I guess you can see the kind of, dim, disturbing view of the future he likes to see in his somewhat post-apocalyptic films. What I would say about Brazil, I also had not seen this one until I picked it up on Criterion here, and upon watching it, I can see why Sean loves it so much. I can see why it's such a popular. Well, I wouldn't even say it's popular though, because most people have never seen it. I'm sure most people have heard of this movie, or at least they are familiar with the name. But I don't think of this as a movie that a lot of people have seen, right? So I'd never seen it before, and after the recommendation from Zaran Isaac, I definitely wanted to. So went ahead and picked up this Criterion finally. He has been recommending it to me for like years, and I just finally got around to it now. Because I kept forgetting about it until just recently. I mean, with everything that's going on in the world right now, I feel like the kind of escapes that I like to get into, and I might have talked about this in another video, but the kind of escapes that I like to get into are escapes that make me think about what's happening in the real world today and what this movie has to say about the kind of cyclical nature of how things happen in humanity, in our lives, in the world around us, so to speak. So, very much the same here. And as with Videodrome, there are a lot of messages in here that I feel like are very poignant, very relatable to current situations in the world around us. So I'm definitely glad that I watched it because, watching movies like this and thinking about how they relate to the world around me allows me to then have a broader view of what's happening so that I don't put it all into one tiny little hole. I can see the entire picture, or attempt to see the entire picture, or at least a wider version of the picture. Brings everything more into focus, brings everything more into view, if you will, to see several different viewpoints of how these things happen, why these things happen, and what humanity is capable of, what humanity does, what technology is capable of, what technology does, those kind of things. So, yeah. What I will say about Brazil after having seen it, it definitely strikes me as a very different version, Terry Gilliam's adaptation of 1984. Oddly enough, it came out in 1985. But yes, I'm sure a lot of people have made the comparisons to 1984 before. I doubt I'm the first one to say that. It doesn't strike me as something that's too hard to see. So, yeah. But that being said, even though it is very much dark and disturbing in some ways like 1984, it's also pretty damn funny because Terry Gilliam, and just a fantastic writer and creator, and I feel like there's always at least a little bit of humor to what he does. Maybe not always. I can think of a few of his movies that aren't even remotely humorous and aren't intended to be humorous, but this one definitely has a twinge, I guess you could say, of humor to it. Dark humor. If I had to pinpoint a genre for this, I would definitely say it is a post-apocalyptic dark humor film, because there is humor to it, but it's also very dark. And again, like with Videodrome, there were things in it that I definitely was able to relate to, like what's happening in the real world today. So there's a scene in this where there's a terrorist attack that happens in a restaurant, and those who are affected obviously just are in shambles and really hurt and everything. But those sitting right next to them who were not affected by it at all don't react at all. It's barely like anything even happened, right? And that reminded me in some ways of how, after things like mass shootings or even just some kind of a terrorist event or whatever, just some terrible thing that happens in the world around us, we focus on it for zero point 0.2 seconds and then we move on to the next thing. And then the next week it happens again. And there are like a bunch of terrorist attacks that happen in Brazil in this movie. So it's interesting to me to see that parallel of all these attacks happening. Nobody cares. Nobody will pay attention to it. Nobody will do anything about it. It's almost as if they scoff at the idea of doing anything about it or speaking out about it. Most they'll do is say these damn terrorists and move on with their lives, and there's nothing else. Kind of reminds you of the whole thoughts and prayers thing that we see nowadays every time something terrible happens. Nobody actually wants to talk about what's going on or how we can fix it. Nobody actually has any kind of an emotional response to what's happening. They just immediately shrug it off like, well, that sucks. Like, that's all they do in this movie. Barely even that, quite frankly. And, well, I can see a lot of parallels between that and this movie and what happens in the real life today in our world. Maybe it's not exactly the same, but there are a lot of interesting parallels there. I think you can agree. Anyways, that was the second pickup I got here from the Criterion sale, and I'm very happy about that. Next up I got Don't Look Now. This is one of those very classic, I would say, somewhat horror films. I don't know if it's like a horror film, but it definitely has horror elements. Stars Donald Sutherland. It's not necessarily like his other horror roles, it's not like the it's not like that, but it is a very interesting role for him, and it is somewhat creepy and spooky along the way as well. It's also a very notable film. I feel like it's not very accessible to some people, but I still think it's a pretty damn good movie. I actually saw this one in college a few times, in fact. I think I saw it twice, and during my film classes, once in one film class and once in another film class. But another big thing about this, other than the horror elements to it, another big thing about this one was there's a sex scene in it that at the time, I think 1973, at the time it was a pretty brazen sex scene to have in a film like this. So, there were people talking about, like, calling this a bad movie or saying it goes too far and whatnot. Funny, having just watched Videodrome, that came out 10 years later. 10 years. And that's the significant difference. Like, that's the amount of difference we saw in film. This pales in comparison with the sex scene in this pales in comparison to what you see in Videodrome. Completely pales. So the critics, screw the critics on this one. This one is a very good movie. I've been meaning to get this one for quite a while now, but it wasn't at the top of my list, so I just kind of waited until I had the money and the desire to finally pick it up. Just like with the F.W. Murnau movies that I got and the Phantom of the Opera movie that I got from the Kino sale, I also picked this one up so that I could watch it during the Halloween season later this year, so very happy to have gotten this one. I can't wait to check it out again. It's not necessarily like a Halloween or spooky, scary movie. It is kind of spooky, though. It does deal with, like, a dead child and the father seeing the child everywhere. I feel like it's more of a suspense movie, though. There are definitely elements that are like horror, but it's more of a suspense movie in my estimation. So yeah, anyways, very much enjoyed this movie and can't wait to see it again. Next up, I decided to pick up Odd Man Out. This one from Carol Reed. It's another one that was recommended to me from a good friend, so I decided to finally check it out. I'm a big fan of noir and noir-like movies. This is one that came out during the whole noir scene, and as a result, it also has a lot of noir influences. So, I don't know if it's necessarily referred to or seen as a noir film, but if you look like at the cinematography and things like that, it's very clearly influenced by the noir movement. So, very cool stuff there. And then, of course, Carol Reed. Carol Reed is one of the great filmmakers of the history of film. So, can't go wrong there. And just the story. I read like the synopsis for the story and it sounds very interesting. So, I mean, think about it. You combine Carol Reed with noir, with a really good story, and I'm sold. That's all I need to know. I mean, Carol Reed is also the one who collaborated on The Third Man with Orson Welles. I love The Third Man. I actually went out of the way to get the newest remaster of the film, which was only available in the UK. So it's one of the big reasons actually that I decided to get a region-free Blu-ray player. And if you look closely, you can actually see the Third Man Blu-ray up there. The new remaster, the good version of it. So, yeah. And the reason I went that route actually was, oddly enough, the Criterion was out of print for The Third Man. So I missed out on that. I did not want to miss out on this one. Because the Criterion for The Third Man still goes for quite a bit of money. Like, I think over $100. So, yeah, not going to miss out on this one. Especially since I do not believe there is a new remaster, a better quality print of it out there yet. So, might as well get the Criterion version while I can. Seems like a really cool film. Can't wait to actually finally check this one out. But I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know. Of all the movies I got, actually, this is the one I still have yet to actually see. I mean, when it comes to Don't Look Now, I have actually seen this one. It's just been several years. Brazil, I saw that one, and Videodrome, I saw both of those movies right after I got my order from Criterion just this week. So, yeah, this is the only one that I actually have not actually watched at any point in history in my life. So, yeah, can't wait to finally get around to that. Sounds really interesting. Can't wait to check it out. Last but not least, I decided to pick up The Great Dictator with Charlie Chaplin. Or as it says here, Charles Chaplin. This, I believe, was his first talkie, or one of his first talkies at least. One of his first speaking roles, one of his first speaking films. He was primarily and predominantly a silent film era actor and filmmaker and whatnot. So, didn't do too many spoken roles. This was one of them. And it is a comedic take on World War II. It is a comedic take on the Nazi regime. And although some might look at that and say, well, that's just inappropriate, you have to remember something. This film actually was made in 1940, before most of the atrocities that they had committed, before anyone knew how all of that would end. He was basically predicting in this movie a lot of things about what might happen and commenting on a lot of the things that were happening at that particular moment in time. And his commentary was on freaking point. Needless to say, just like with Videodrome in Brazil, I felt like I wanted to get this primarily because I wanted some more context, what was going on just in our lives, in our modern era. Because I was seeing a lot of things happening that feel like, I swear I've heard about this having happened previously in human history. And so I've been wanting to go back and watch historical documentaries, watch movies about history. And this is a movie about history. And sure, it's a comedy because it's Charlie Chaplin. But it's also like it has a lot of poignant commentary about what was actually happening at the time. It makes fun of the people who were doing terrible things, but it also points out how terrible the things were that they were doing, how terrible the reasons for them doing those things were. Like, in particular, they several times, instead of Hitler, there's this guy called Hinkle, right? Several times in this movie, I feel like, or at least once or twice, he talks about villainizing the Jews, not because he hates them, but because he wants to use them as a scapegoat. He talks about using them as a scapegoat as if, like, let's put pressure on them, but only for my political gain, right? It's not that he hates them, the character in this movie. It's not that he hates the Jews. It's that he wants to use other people's hatred for them for his own political gain. And that spoke volumes to me because I feel like what we're seeing in a lot of cases with certain political figures today. I'm probably going to lose a lot of subscribers with that one. But yeah, interesting parallels to be made there. And obviously very glad that I decided to get this so I could finally watch it. Had never seen it before. Really wanted to, especially with all the stuff going on in the world today, especially with all the stuff going on in my country today. So, yes, very happy to have gotten this. And of course, there's also the scene at the end of the movie where Charlie Chaplin basically just gets up on stage and delivers an epic speech about how we can't let people get away with this crap. And I'm sure people have seen the speech. Most people, if you haven't heard of this movie, you've probably seen the speech. Even if you haven't heard of the movie, even if you haven't seen the movie, you've probably seen the speech. Because the speech has made the round several times on social media just in the last 5 to 6 years or so. I remember seeing it as far back as like 2009 and 2008. And people have used the speech out of context for their own political gain, for their own political means. However you want to see that, they have, on both sides of the fence, used it for their own means. So it's not like I'm pinpointing and ostracizing one political viewpoint here. Both sides of the political fence have done it in taking that particular speech out of context and trying to use it for their own reasons to support their own beliefs. You know what I mean? So, yeah, what I would say is it's very nice to have the context, and the context is pretty important. It's not necessarily super important because the speech does definitely stand on its own, but when you at least have the context of understanding that Charlie Chaplin was not a fan of Hitler, he was making fun of Hitler with this movie, heavily so. He was not a fan of what was happening there. He had some very harsh commentary about, like I said, about Hitler using the Jews as a pawn, as a scapegoat, not necessarily because he hated them, but because he wanted to use them for his own political gain. So that commentary is very direct. It's very obvious. So, like, with that context in there, it's pretty clear to see what side of the fence Charlie Chaplin was on when he made this movie. So that's all I will say about that. I'm so glad I got this one because I think out of all of them, I really liked Brazil. I liked Videodrome. But this one was my favorite of all the Criterions that I got. This one is so freaking good. I can see myself watching this several times in the future. I think it might even be one of my new favorites. It's just a really great film. And The physical comedy in particular is just so fantastic. Obviously, it's Charlie Chaplin, but I mean, it's cool to see that even in 1940, even at like nearing the end of his career there, even though he had moved on from the silent era to the talkie, he still was the king. He was still a king of these of the physical comedy. Physical comedy in this is just freaking fantastic. There are so many scenes in this. There's one scene in particular that I'm like, I know I've seen that somewhere before. Yeah, I saw Bugs Bunny do that in a Looney Tunes cartoon. And then it was the scene where there's a scene in this where they're in a barber shop. Essentially, it's not like really a barber shop, but it's essentially a place where they get their hair done and stuff like that, right? And as a result, they have like the barber chair that when you pull the lever on the side, it goes up and up and up and up, right? And the physical comedy of this being, of course, that like even though most barbershops don't have chairs that go up all the way to the ceiling, in this one they do. So they're just like constantly pulling him up and be like, I'm higher than you, I'm better than you. And so just like that fantastic physical comedy there. And I'm like, holy crap, that's something that they did in the Looney Tunes cartoon with Bugs Bunny. And then I thought about how like Charlie Chaplin does that thing with his whiskers, you know, in a lot of his movies. I don't think he really does it that much in this one, if at all. But he has done a lot. He has done that a lot. That is definitely like a notable characteristic of Charlie Chaplin. And what do you think Bugs Bunny does with his whiskers? He does that all the time too. So it made me realize how much of Bugs Bunny's character came from Charlie Chaplin. I hadn't thought about it until I watched this movie. And yeah, absolutely. I can see the resemblance in some ways. I won't say that he's an just absolute reference to Charlie Chaplin. I would just say like some of his mannerisms and even some of the gags that he pulls, the physical comedy that he pulls in Looney Tunes are very similar, if not complete references to what Charlie Chaplin has done in some of his movies. So that's kind of cool. Anyways, that all being said, that is all I got in this particular sale. I got 5 titles. I believe Brazil was actually the one that cost the most. I think this one was $25, while the rest were $20 each. So pretty cool deal right there, because usually they cost like $30-$40 each. So we can get them in Criterion sale for $20 or $25. Pretty good deal. I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, and I'm happy that I actually got some Criterion titles that I've been, like this one I have, Don't Look Now, I've been needing in my collection for quite some time. This one I've been meaning to watch for a long time and just never got around to it until now, because now was when I really wanted to see it. Then Videodrome in Brazil added a little bit to that post-apocalyptic dystopian future thing, that like this kick that I'm going on right now, because I feel like we're in a bit of a dystopian future right now. And a lot of these movies and novels and whatnot about dystopian futures, maybe they don't have specific direct examples of exactly the same thing that's happening today. However, they do have examples that are very similar in a lot of ways to what is happening today, as I laid out with Videodrome in Brazil and even The Great Dictator, although that's not really that's not really a post-apocalyptic or dystopian film. I guess some might say it's a little bit dystopian, but yeah, it's not really. It's more of like just a dark comedy, kind of like Brazil, dark comedy. So, yeah, that all being said, that's all that I got this week. So, this video's over. Thanks for watching, guys. Catch you later. Peace.